the sale is going to happen or not, and it's going to happen if Xi Jinping and Donald Trump decide they want it to, and it's not if one of those men decides they don't want that. Right now, both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump have a lot of control over TikToks. One thing I'm really curious about in the deal is whether either of them would retain control. And I'm very wary about the Chinese government or the US government having control over such an important organ of speech.
Emily Baker White, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you have a new book out. It's excellent, about the war over TikTok. You're probably the best reporter on this subject. So talk to me about the first TikTok story that you wrote.
The first TikTok story I wrote was about something called Project Texas. And I reported this story in early 2022. I went and talked to a bunch of people who worked at TikTok and said, what should I know? And they said, well, we're all working on this secret project known as Project Texas, where we're essentially trying to rewire the inside of TikTok so that US user data is no longer accessible to people in China.
And what did you find out in that story? I think you kept at it, right?
Yeah, so that first story was interesting. I reported, what they had told me, that there was this big internal project. But it wasn't a hugely impactful story. A few weeks after that story, though, I received an email that said, Project Texas, want more? And this is like a really fun email to get as a reporter because you always want more. And so I spoke to the person who sent me that email for a period of time. And then that person gave me audio recordings of more than 80 internal meetings at TikTok and its parent company ByteDance about this thing called Project Texas. And what those recordings showed was that, yes, TikTok and ByteDance were trying to find a way to sort of separate TikTok's internal systems from ByteDance's internal systems. And the reason they were trying to do that is that they didn't want employees at ByteDance who were living in China to be able to access private information about US TikTok users. And they didn't want those people in China to be able to access that data because they were worried that the Chinese government might want to access that data. And they were worried that the Chinese government might go and shake down their employees for it, send goons out to their house. They knock on the door, say, hi, you're going to have to turn over this data or else. And that was the sort of fear within TikTok and ByteDance. And that was also a fear that started taking hold in the US government about TikTok and ByteDance.
And so is there any evidence that the Chinese government has spied on American users of TikTok?
That the Chinese government has spied on US users of TikTok, no. But there is evidence that people at ByteDance have accessed the data of US users of TikTok, including me. And we know that the Chinese government has expressed an interest in TikTok and what happens to TikTok. And there's a story of one person in my book who actually told the US courts that he spoke out about TikTok and ByteDance and censorship that happened on TikTok. He spoke to the press in the United States, and then the Chinese government apparently came after his family and told him to shut up through his family back in China. And so that is not the same thing as the Chinese government trying to shake down an employee for data, but it is an indication that the Chinese government has an interest in TikTok and had an interest in us not having a conversation about whether TikTok was censoring content.
And they spied on you. You alluded to that. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So after I reported the story based on all these tapes, the company kind of freaked out a little bit. They said, oh my goodness, there are these leaks. We have to stop them at all costs. And so a group of people who were tasked with stopping leaks made the decision to try to figure out who was sourcing me and who was sourcing another reporter who works at the Financial Times by actually pulling data from our TikTok accounts about where we physically were, pulling our IP addresses and cross-referencing those IP addresses with the IP addresses of everyone who worked at TikTok and ByteDance. And the theory behind this was if a reporter and a ByteDance staffer in the same hotel or coffee shop or library, that might be an indication that they're talking, right? And so they were sort of trying to ferret out leakers, but in doing so, they were surveilling me and they were surveilling this other reporter. And some of the people who were engaged in that project were physically in China. And TikTok and ByteDance had spent months telling the US government, other governments, we are not a surveillance operation. TikTok is not spying on you. And at least in this sort of limited case, employees at TikTok and ByteDance, some of whom were in China, were in fact spying on me.
And at first, did they acknowledge it or did they deny it?
At first, they did not acknowledge it. At first, they denied it. But after they denied it, they brought in Covington, the white shoe law firm, to investigate and try to figure out why I had reported that it had happened. And after they did their own investigation, they found pretty much what I had found, which was that there was this group of people who were trying to stop leaks by surveilling me and another reporter. And they eventually fired those people and sort of came clean and said this happened, but we're going to make sure it can't happen again.
So, how popular is the app in the US?
Massively, massively popular. So, according to TikTok and ByteDance, as of 2024, 170 million Americans regularly use the app. I think that's more people, close to the same number of people who voted in the 2024 election. We're talking about like a market penetration that very, very few companies, let alone, media companies, have in the United States at all,
Let alone a foreign company.
let alone a foreign company.
So, who is ByteDance? What is ByteDance? And what is their relationship with the Chinese government?
Yeah, ByteDance is a tech giant. It is like a Google or a Meta in China. And it's very powerful and very big. And in China, they run tons of very successful apps, but their most successful two apps are an app called Jinri Toutiao, which means today's headlines. And that's a news aggregator app that got really big in like 2014, 2015, before TikTok was even around. Their other smash hit in China is called Douyin, which is the TikTok equivalent in China. And ByteDance has, been around since 2012 in China. It's enormous. It has many, many different apps, both there and abroad. And you ask what its relationship with the Chinese government is. ByteDance is really into serving people algorithmic content based on what it perceives that they want to see. And at times that has caused tension with the Chinese government because ByteDance wants to serve you, a feed of news based on what it thinks your interests are. And sometimes the Chinese government wants to serve you a feed of news based on what it thinks your interests should be. And so ByteDance has actually sort of found itself in conflict with the Chinese government at various points in its life. But like all Chinese companies, it has to obey the Chinese government when the Chinese government orders it to do things. And in that sense, the Chinese government has a lot of power over ByteDance, the same way it has lots of power over a Tencent or an Alibaba. And that power is what led a lot of people in the United States to worry that someday the Chinese government would order ByteDance to use TikTok either to surveil people in the United States or serve them propaganda.
And during Trump's first term, he tried to ban it, right? Even Marco Rubio, the current Secretary of State, I think was a big proponent of banning it.
Marco Rubio was early to the TikTok ban train. Yes, Donald Trump tried to ban TikTok in 2020. He ended up attempting to use a law to do that really didn't allow him to do that. And eventually that's what the courts decided, that like you can't ban TikTok in the way that you want to ban TikTok under the authority that you want to use to ban TikTok. Then Trump left office, and so that effort fizzled. And the Biden administration came in and said, all right, we're not going to ban TikTok. We're going to negotiate with TikTok. Fast forward 2 years later, the Biden administration eventually comes around to where the Trump administration was, saying, man, we really do think there's a risk here unless ByteDance sells TikTok. And Trump had tried to force a sale of TikTok. But at the last minute, the Chinese government had swooped in and said, you can't sell the TikTok recommendations algorithm because it's subject to export controls and we get to decide whether you can sell that or not. And that prohibition on selling the algorithm meant that ByteDance went back to the Biden administration and said, we can't sell. We'd love to sell maybe, but we can't sell because we're not allowed to. And the Biden administration said, well, you're going to have to, or you're going to get banned. And they eventually worked with Congress to pass a law that sort of forced ByteDance, or tried to force ByteDance, to choose between obeying Chinese law and obeying U.S. law.
And that case ultimately went up to the Supreme Court, right?
That case went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld the law that Congress had passed, but then Donald Trump was reelected completely serendipitously. There was a 270-day clock on giving ByteDance time to sell TikTok before a ban would go into effect. And by happenstance, that clock ran out on the day before Inauguration Day 2025. And
Was it by happenstance?
I think it was by happenstance. Actually, the way that the law started out, it was going to be a 180-day clock, and then Congress extended it to be a 270-day clock. I don't think anybody saw it coming. But yes, so that clock runs out the day before Inauguration Day. Donald Trump has been reelected. He tells everybody, no, it's okay, we're going to disregard this law. And he actually asks Apple and Google and Oracle to disregard the law before he's inaugurated. I mean, at the moment he asks them to do that, he's just a guy. And he has no legal authority to actually promise that there won't be repercussions. But Apple and Google and Oracle take the plunge and do what Trump asks them to do. And then they continue to do what Trump asked them to do and continue to ignore that law, just like Trump then tells his DOJ to ignore that law until today. And during that period, Trump says, we're going to make a deal. We're going to get TikTok sold to US investors. And now we're at a moment where Trump has announced that they have a framework, they have concepts of a plan, they're close to a deal that he and the Chinese government have agreed to. Now, just today, Trump went and made a bunch of comments about the Chinese government that might blow up that deal. I don't know. But it appears that the deal, so much as we know about it, is not the sort of clean break between TikTok and ByteDance that Congress had contemplated and had said is necessary. It seems like it's something short of that, something not entirely divorced from Project Texas, which ByteDance and TikTok had been trying to sell the first Trump administration and then the Biden administration. And it looks like, they may have finally found a taker here in Trump 2.0.
So is that why the valuation, I think it's at 14 billion, is that why it's so low? Because it's not really a clean cut of the company?
Yeah. So given what we know, there are a few reasons why that valuation is probably as low as it is. One, Bloomberg reported that so this sale does not include the For You algorithm. ByteDance will keep the algorithm and will license it to the new US entity. And not only will it license the algorithm to the US entity, it will be entitled to roughly 50% of profit moving forward.
In
That is
perpetuity?
generated at least for the terms of the license, and I'm not sure we know how long that is. We also don't know what kind of license we're talking about, and that's really important when you think about the national security concerns, right? There are types of software licenses where you basically get a clean cut of the code, you can do whatever you want with it. And if that's the case, then I don't see real national security concerns about who owns the algorithm as long as the new US entity has total control over it. But there are other types of software licenses where you're not allowed to change the code. You're, still beholden to the licensor to update the code at various points. And if that's the case, then, it seems like ByteDance really does continue to control that secret sauce. And until we know what type of license we're talking about, I think we don't know whether that creates ongoing risks or not. But that aside, other reasons why the valuation is low. Reuters reported that ByteDance will continue to have control over advertising and e-commerce on the platform. And it looks like what is being sold is probably just or close to just the sort of walled off entity that was in charge of controlling US user data at TikTok, which was something known as TikTok US Data Services, or USDS. And TikTok USDS was created as part of this Project Texas by TikTok and ByteDance as an effort to say, okay, we have a hermetically sealed unit in the United States that has access to sensitive user data, and that unit will sort of protect that user data from the rest of TikTok and ByteDance. If that is the only thing being sold, though, TikTok Inc., like TikTok International, which is, still a part of ByteDance, the global part of TikTok, still has much more say over what'll actually sort of happen on the platform, over business, over strategic direction. And so we haven't seen a copy of this deal yet, and there's a lot we don't know. But one of the things that I would definitely want to know is how much control TikTok Global continues to have, which TikTok Global, which is owned by ByteDance and will still be owned by ByteDance if the deal goes through, how much control they have over the direction of the platform and how much the new US entity has control over. And it may be that the US entity has a lot of control, but we just don't know that yet. And I think that could be contributing to the low valuation as well.
Why did Trump take such an interest in this sales process? During his first term, we spoke about it. He wanted to ban the app. So what changed between the first term and now?
Um, it seems that Trump assesses the value of social platforms based on how good he thinks they are for him. So in 2020, shortly before Trump announced that he wanted to ban the app, a group of K-pop fans reserved tickets to a Trump rally that they had no intention of attending, so that they could take attendance at that rally. And this was a moment when a lot of people first learned what TikTok was. It was TikTok's sort of first big moment in politics, and it may have caused some antipathy toward TikTok from Trump and his team. But by 2024, Trump joined the app as a presidential candidate, and he thought that it contributed to his success on the platform, and he thought it helped him win. And so he wanted to keep it around. At one point, someone asked him, "Why did you change your mind on TikTok?" And he answered, "Because I got to use it." And I think um, Trump saw TikTok as good for Trump, and so he wanted to keep it around.
And he still wants to keep it around. Talk to me about this new ownership group. It has a lot of powerful allies, right? Ellison, Murdoch, some of these familiar conservative names.
Yeah, so we still don't know exactly who is in the group, and within that group, how much control anyone would have. It seems clear that Ellison through Oracle is likely a big player here, and Oracle has been essential to TikTok's Project Texas plan for years now. Oracle is the entity that hosts TikTok's US user data for TikTok USDS. And Oracle has long sort of wanted to own a piece of TikTok. And if this deal goes through, this could be a way that will really happen. Trump did say that the Murdochs may also be in the investor group. We know also that MGX, the Emirati firm, is apparently now also in the deal. We don't know what share or what role they would have in the deal going forward. It sounds like things are still very much in flux, but some people look at this and say this is an attempt to sort of transfer control of TikTok to Trump aligned forces. And that might be true, but it also might be that those forces are more interested in making money than they are in sort of furthering Trump's agenda. And I think if the deal goes through, one big question is, are we going to get like an Elon Musk takes over Twitter, turns it into X, and radically changes it situation? Or are we going to get a more straight capitalistic investors take over and change very little and just try to make more money off the platform? And I don't think we know which of those worlds we're in yet, but that's definitely something to watch.
Could the owners make it more Trumpy even if they don't own the algorithm?
Definitely. So the algorithm is not the only way that you can change the mix of content on the platform. There is also something called the heating button, where you can simply, quote, heat content and blast it out to more users. And my understanding is control of the heating button would be transferred to the new owner should something like this go through. They could also change content policies and say X, Y, or Z content will no longer be allowed on the app, or XYZ content that is currently banned will now be allowed on the app. And just doing that could definitely make the app more or less Trumpy.
How did the algorithm go from lip syncing? I think everyone remembers March of 2020. It was a lot of music video type content into really a competitor to YouTube. There's just so much content on it, ranging from education to politics. So how did it make that leap?
Intentionally. ByteDance worked hard to try to change the mix of content on TikTok, which was known as Musical.ly before it was TikTok. They knew that they had this sort of incredible devoted audience of middle schoolers who really loved using TikTok to make lip syncing videos. And that was very powerful, right? They had this built in user base. And if they completely pivoted away from that all at once, those kids would have lost interest and that would have been bad. But they knew that they wanted to make TikTok more like Douyin was in China, which was sort of a short video for everything. And they knew that would radically increase the platform's interest and power and potential user base. And so they did very intentionally try to recruit creators in different sectors and then heat the content of those creators in different sectors to try to bring in more genres and interest people with a wider set of video interests.
And ByteDance scraped at first Instagram and YouTube videos possibly against those platforms' rules, right? To help their algorithm and help the platform.
They sure did. So I talked to folks at an app called Flipagram, which was acquired by ByteDance in 2017. And those folks said that after Flipagram was acquired, they learned that Flipagram was scraping content from Instagram and other websites and then reposting it using fake accounts on Flipagram. And their theory was that they could make it look like everybody was on this app, Flipagram. It was so popular. Everyone was posting on it. Whereas really they were impersonating creators who were posting elsewhere, posting their content on Flipagram in order to try to sort of make it look more popular. They were also using that same content to train their own For You algorithm to make it stronger and better at predicting what folks, especially outside of China, audiences in the US and elsewhere wanted to see.
People really love this algorithm. I love the algorithm. Why is it so difficult for other tech companies to make an algorithm as powerful and as sharp as TikTok's algorithm?
So I think TikTok started out doing something pretty different from what Facebook or YouTube or other, Instagram, other big platforms were trying to do. Facebook rolled out as a place where you go to interact with your friends. Instagram, same thing. Snapchat, same thing. You were using this app to connect with people that you knew in real life. And in a way, TikTok was more like Netflix than it was like Instagram because you're not watching people you know. This wasn't about people you know. This was just about holding your attention. And the way that they tried to do that on an Instagram or a YouTube, you would go to the app and you would tell it what you wanted to see. On Facebook, that meant like friending people and following people and liking content. On YouTube, it usually meant using the search bar. But TikTok, when you open it, is just a thing that happens to you. And you scroll and it decides rather than you deciding what you want to see. And this was something that ByteDance was thinking about a long time ago, back when they were making that first news aggregator app in China, Jinri Toutiao. Um, Zhang Yiming, the founder of ByteDance, believed that we could use technology to index all the information out there and learn enough about people that technology could be better at serving you the stuff that you wanted to see than you could be at searching for it. He thought that information could search for people instead of people searching for information. And on the one hand, if you have all the information, you have enough information about all the people, yeah, you can serve me breaking news about topics I'm interested in before I know that news is broken. On the other hand, that means that we as consumers of information would be ceding control over what we want to learn to some faceless algorithm controlled by some guys, right? And the idea that I don't need to ask questions anymore because the answers will come to me anyway takes away from me the right to decide which questions I want to ask. And that's pretty weird.
Where do you think the platform goes in the next few years? Do you think they'll lean into e-commerce? We saw OpenAI release Sora with a lot of in fact, no human generated videos, all AI generated videos. Do you think it'll become more newsy, more politics being fed into the feed? Where do you see it going?
I think it depends whether the sale goes through, but I think we have seen already. Cory Doctorow talks about enshittification of platforms, right? And platforms sort of starting out, companies even beyond platforms, start out trying really hard to be good to the user because they want to get users and keep users. And once they've really hooked you, Uber and Lyft gave us a lot of free rides at the beginning because they wanted to form habits. And then they took them away and they jacked up the prices and we stuck around, right? And I think there may be some of that feeling on TikTok, especially as TikTok has tried to push TikTok Shop a lot. I think users are sort of disenchanted by TikTok's new emphasis on trying to be like Amazon and trying to, feed us a bunch of usually cheap goods. And so I'm curious if they're going to keep leaning into that and keep trying to sell more goods, sell more goods, sell more goods, or whether they'll back off of that. They got to make money somehow. And, Instagram has kind of gone the other way. They're not selling us goods, but they sure are filling our feeds with ads far more than they used to. And I think, if TikTok goes the way of Instagram or really pushes e-commerce even harder, it will slowly, I mean, platforms die really slowly, right? We still all have Facebook, even though we don't use it. We still all have and even kind of use Instagram, but we don't really like it. Um, I think TikTok has a long runway with a lot of culture and power still, but I wonder if they try too hard to extract more revenue, whether they will start losing the sort of cultural zeitgeist power that they've had for the past couple of years.
And lastly, can you talk about this moment that we're in? It feels like these channels of information today, especially in the tech world, seem to be increasingly Trump aligned, whether it's Meta with Mark Zuckerberg, X with Elon Musk, now TikTok with this conservative investor group. Can you just talk to me about this moment?
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment when, the law is about to go into effect and Trump comes in and says, "I'm going to save TikTok." There was a kind of revealing moment for a bunch of TikTok creators who looked at TikTok. And during this moment, it's like putting all these notifications in the feed being like, "We're working with President Trump, who's going to save TikTok. Thank you, President Trump." And there were a lot of like TikTok creators who are not fans of President Trump who say, "What the hell, TikTok? Are you just like the propaganda arm of the Trump administration now? This feels gross and different. This feels like our favorite app is like potentially going to become propaganda." And a lot of those people had been really skeptical of the national security concerns about China. And the idea that the Chinese government was going to try to use TikTok to propagandize them had never really hit. But when it was a politician that they knew and disliked and distrusted, and they started seeing what they thought was the company and the platform aligning with that political figure, I think the idea that your favorite platform could become a political tool of an autocrat hit home in a different way. And we don't know if that's ultimately going to happen to TikTok or not yet. But the truth is, like, right now, the sale is going to happen or not, and it's going to happen if Xi Jinping and Donald Trump decide they want it to. And it's not if one of those men decides they don't want that. Right now, both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump have a lot of control over TikTok's future. One thing I'm really curious about in the deal is whether either of them would retain control, whether there would be terms about data sharing with the government or terms about the government being able to, change content policies, that type of thing. And I'm very wary about the Chinese government or the US government having control over such an important organ of speech. And I think creators should be too. Everyone who uses these platforms should know, beyond TikTok, uses Meta, uses X, right? Like, should know that at the end of the day, there are humans behind these platforms and they are making decisions about what you should see. And we should all be skeptical of those humans and their incentives, both financial and political.
Emily Baker White, thank you so much for joining me. The book is called Every Screen on the Planet, The War Over TikTok. It is perfectly timed, and everyone should buy it where they buy their books. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.